This is the first of two videos for working with census data. In this first video, we're going to concentrate on preparing the data for the actual thematic mapping. So to get started, we need to download census data, and there's many different ways to do that. We're going to do two different processes. The first process is using the bundled, what's called Tiger products, and the Tiger products, I have a little notepad here that I'm going to open up, stands for the topologically integrated geographic encoding and reference system. And this is the official geometry of the U.S. Census. So if we want the actual boundaries from the U.S. Census for census tracts or for counties, this is where we get it. We get it from the Tiger files. So we're going to go ahead and start with this, and we're going to work with a geodatabase, a bundled product first, and then we're going to do it separate of that. We're going to actually do it in shapefile format. So to get started here, I want to navigate to the Tiger data, and then I want to go into this bundled product. Let me go back there real fast. So it's not the shapefiles, it's not the geodatabase itself, it's the data from selected attributes. And it's this third one down. And here we can see that we have 2010 census. We also have American Community Survey estimates. So I'm going to want to use this 2011 to 2015, the detailed tables here. So this is our 5-year estimate, and it basically is 2011 to 2015 time frame. And we want to download county. So we want to get all counties in the United States. It's about 188 megabytes of data. It takes about 20 seconds or so more to go. Once I download it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just quickly unzip it and stick it into a folder that I'll make right now. I'm just going to call this census underscore mapping. So everything's going to go in this folder. And let me go ahead and get that data. Stick it on the data desktop, and what I'm going to do is put it in my folder and then immediately open it up. So I'll extract all, and as I do that, it's important to note the extension here. The file extension is .gdb, and if I open it up, we can see we have all these files, and these don't really make any sense to us outside of a GIS. What's important about a geodatabase is that it's a database type that is specific to Esri, but GIS or QGIS can read it. So we're going to go ahead and read it in now. We want to make sure that we get rid of the zip file, so we're just going to delete that. Okay, so let's go into QGIS and get set up on this and take a look at it. So under my favorites, I'm just going to go ahead and add a directory. I'm going to go ahead and stick it on census mapping and put it right on top of the geodatabase. So I'm going to get to it and say select folder. And actually, you know what? I'm going to do that differently. I'm just going to go ahead and go to the top folder and just call it census mapping. Now here, if I look in, I can't really see anything here. Okay, so I need to go into my layers panel. And what I'm going to do now is bring it in as a vector layer. So I click on vector layer, and it's not going to be a file, it's actually going to be a directory. So I click on directory. Under the type, I may see Esri geodatabase here, which is an option, or you can use open file geodatabase, that'll work. And we're going to now point it to the geodatabase. So I go to desktop, my mapping, and just point it to the folder. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and say open. And as it opens now, it gives me a preview that makes a little bit more sense than what I was looking at before. So here we can see we have looks like about 31 layers here, and we have a multi-polygon. That's the actual geometry. That's the county geometry. We also have a metadata, which is something that we need. And then we have the themes. Okay, so these are all the different themes that we can actually work with. So we have raw counts, we have age and sex, race. I'm going to use age and sex as a preview. So I'm just going to go ahead and touch on control and select county and then select age and sex. And it's going to bring everything in all at once. And I go ahead and say open and it comes down. So this is good. I'm going to go ahead and save at this point. So I'm going to save this project within my project folder called census mapping, and I'm just going to call it M1 for map 1. Save it. And the first thing I want to do is, as it comes in, I can see that I have a file that looks like it's been stretched horizontally, and that's because of the current coordinate system that it's in. So it's in WGS 1984 currently, and I need to actually put it into a map projection that's going to give it, quote, a better shape. And I can do that many different ways, and I don't want to get into map projections right now, but there's an easy way to do this through a process called on-the-fly projection. So if we go up to project and go down to project properties, under project properties we can set what's called the coordinate reference system, and we're going to do that right now. So you can see here I have one that's going to work. I can filter it. I need to say that I'm enabling on-the-fly projection at the top, and then I can filter on these numbers. And I'm not going to explain what these numbers are right now, these EPSG numbers. There's a whole system for these numbers that we'll explain at a later date. But for right now, I could just type in 5070, and it's going to bring me to a coordinate system that's going to work. In this case, equal area, Albers equal area, works really good for the census for the lower 48. And we'll see it in just a second. So I go ahead and click on it and say apply and say OK. And you can see that the shape of the lower 48 changes. And since our mapping is going to be of the lower 48, this is a really appropriate coordinate system to use, or map projection to use. So it gives us a better feeling for and a better look to the actual map. It represents the actual area of these counties better. And as soon as I do that, I want to pick out a scale that's going to make sense. So right now I'm at about 40 million. I want to drop this down to about 20 million. So I'm going to go down into my scale bar down here and type in 20. And then I want to position the map close to how I would like to see it printed. So something like this makes sense. For this particular mapping, I'm only going to worry about the lower 48. I'm not going to pay attention to Alaska or Hawaii or Puerto Rico. So I kind of have it set up here as I would like it to print in Print Composer. I'm going to make a spatial bookmark. So I click on spatial bookmark, and I'm just going to call this M1 for map 1. And I'm immediately going to save this project. So I go ahead and save it. So everything that I've done to this point is now saved. And if I get a crash, which can happen, I can get back to this particular location in my project. So we have our shape files. We can see it on the map here. The problem is that if we go to Open Attribute Table, we don't have a lot that's very meaningful beyond some basic columns denoting the name, denoting IDs, but we don't have any census data in here. So this is just the geometry itself. And we need to kind of look at these columns real quick. So the geo ID is going to become a very important column in just a moment. Let's go ahead and take a look at our metadata. So the metadata is the data dictionary for the actual theme that we downloaded. In this case, we downloaded something that has to do with age. So we can see sex by age, and it also has obviously to do with male or female. So here's all our themes right here. And what's important about the themes is that they are segmented out literally by theme. So in this case, we can see that I have sex by age, and then I go down a little ways, and then all of a sudden sex by age changes to be sex by age white alone. And then we go down a little bit farther, and then we have Black and American. Then we have sex by age for all these different ethnic categories. If we keep on going, we have sex by place and birth. So we have all these different themes that we can map. It's very rich and detailed. For the purposes of the video here, I'm going to keep it very simple, and we're going to map using total population. We're going to use total male population and 5 years and under, or under 5 years. Now what's important here is that we can see a margin of error, and we can also see an estimate column. The estimate column is the actual data itself. The margin of error is just telling us how confident we are within that particular county for the estimate that was taken. And remember, estimates, census is based on estimation processes, and importantly at the American Community Survey, which is not the standard census, it's the year in between two standard census takings. It has an estimation process that's different than an actual census like in 2000 or 2010. So we just need to be aware of that. We're not interested in matching these M columns, these margin of errors. We're interested in the estimates themselves. All right, so before we get too far along, we need to realize that if we open up the attribute table and we scroll through this, we have a huge universe of variables here, and that makes a table pretty large. And when we have large tables, joins take forever. The working of the data takes a very long time. So especially with census, we want to kind of cull out our table. And the problem is that this table currently is stuck in a geodatabase, so we can't really do a lot with it. We can't edit it easily and freely. So we want to actually get this out to a format that we can edit. And so what we want to do is just do a right click and do save as. We're going to save it in this case as a comma separated value. So there's CSV up at the top. We're going to put it in our folder, and I'm going to have census mapping, and I'm going to make a new folder called exports. So everything's going to be export. So all my work's going to be exports. And I'm going to call this just AS for age and sex, and say save. And I'm going to go ahead and just say OK, and it's going to take about 30 seconds to save it. And I'm just going to pause the video while it does that. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and open up the CSV, and as we do that, we can just take a look at the data, make sure it's all there. It is all there, and importantly, we have a GeoID here. And one thing I want to do before we get too much farther is actually cull some of the columns to make the data a little bit more manageable. So the columns that I'm really interested in for this particular mapping are these three: total population, total males, and 5-year-old pop males. And I can see these column, so it's E1, E2, and E3. I really don't need anything else for this particular mapping. So before I join this table to my geometry, I'm just going to go ahead and clean it up. So if I go to properties, what I can do is I can toggle on editing now. So I go to toggle editing. Remember, this won't take place if you're in a geodatabase, but it will if you're in CSV outside. And these are the fields that I want to get rid of. Everything from 7 for my particular mapping all the way down to 719. So I'm just going to shift. And now I want to go ahead, since I'm toggled on, I can delete these fields. So I just click on delete. And it'll take a moment for it to actually kick in. And you can see it's spinning there. And once it's done, I can then apply it and toggle off. Okay, so I go ahead and now we can see that we just have what we need. And I'm actually going to get rid of the margin of errors too. So I'm going to click on that one, and let's get rid of that one. I'm going to click on this one, get rid of him. So I just have my fields that I'm interested in mapping. I'll say apply, OK. And then I'm going to toggle off and say toggle editing. Do you want to save everything? Yes, I want to save that. Now, if we go back and take a look at our properties, we do have an issue here, which is we have strings, and string columns are not mappable when we actually get into thematic mapping. So let's just do quickly, let's do a join, and then we'll tackle that particular issue. So if I go to, I want to join now my AS to my actual geometry. So I'm going to go to properties for the geometry itself, and I'm going to go into joins, and I'm going to create a join. I add a little plus mark down the bottom here. And my join layer, remember I'm not joining to the metadata or the age and sex. I'm actually joining to my new CSV. So I click on my new CSV, and the join field is going to be the geo ID, and he's going to be joined to the geo ID. Okay, so it's, in this particular instance, it's geo ID to geo ID. Let me make sure. Let's go back. It's always good to double check your join columns. So if I go back to open attribute table, this is the number geo ID, and that's the same number as geo ID. Oh, it's actually not the same number. So I have an issue here where my geo ID in my CSV is not the same as my geo ID in the other column. Let's see if there's something that will work. So if I open the attribute table, I'm looking for something that looks like that. Let me see if I can find something. See here it's geo ID data. That's what I want to be joining on, and you can see it's a string there. So let's do that. So we're going to go to properties. We're going to go to joins. I'm glad I checked that. Let's go into joins. Yeah. And we're going to be joining our tabular data, age and sex. The join column is going to be geo ID. And here I want to point it to geo ID data, where it's sitting at the bottom. So ABC to ABC, those are basically string columns there, and I go ahead and say OK. And then I say apply and say OK. And let's see now if I have a good join. So if I open the attribute table, I should see my data now coming in. And sure enough, there it is. So that's great. Now, if I go into, before we go any farther, I want to solidify this join. So what I do is I go save as. I'm going to save it as a shapefile in this case. I'm going to point it to my folder. So I'm going to go to my desktop, exports, and I'm going to call this M1 AS for age and sex. Okay, so map 1, age and sex, and I say save and say OK. And I'm going to get rid of the original thing so I don't get confused. And I'm going to get rid of this guy so I don't get confused. And I'll keep my metadata. I'll keep my original CSV here. And let's go ahead and go to properties. And under properties, let's go take a look at fields again. So under fields here, I have some real numbers. I have strings. And for my columns that I want to be mapping on down here at the bottom, these are strings also. So if I come on over here to actually do a mapping, let's just do a little test. So if I go to properties, and I'm going to go into style, graduated symbology, and I'm going to try to go to my columns. We can see I only have certain columns available here. It's because those string values haven't been converted into a integer value, and I need to go ahead and do that. So how do we do that? So the way to do that is, there's a couple ways, but a pretty straightforward one is if we go back to properties and we go into fields, we can create some new fields here. And since I'm not going to be worrying about, in this particular video, about normalizing columns, I'm just going to do one of these. I'm just going to do one column for right now. And let me show you what that looks like. So this is total population, is the E1 column. So what I want to do is make a new column called total pop that's going to be E1 values, but instead of being in string, it's going to be an integer. So the way that we do that is we go up here to Field Calculator. We say create a new field. The output field name is going to be what we want it to be. So in this case, I want it to be total pop. And I want it to be a whole number, integer 64 bits, fine. And the output length, if I have something like 20, that's plenty fine. And then what I need to do is I need to say what do I want in this particular new field that I make within my data table. And oftentimes we want to do one of these functions here. But in this case, really what I want to do is I just want to go to field and values. And I want to put my values from E1 into this particular column. So I just double click on that. And there it is. And I go ahead and say OK. And if I take a look now, I have a new column that's called total pop, and it has 20 length, and it's an integer now. So I'll just say apply, OK. And we can see it's toggled on editing. I go ahead and toggle editing off. Do you want to save your changes? Yes. So it saves the changes. Let's go look. So if I open up the attribute table now, here was my original column, 9078. Here's my total population now, 9078. Let's just do a quick test to make sure that without mapping it, if we just go to Properties and go into Style and go to Graduated Symbology, we can see now under Total Population, it does see it as a column that can be mapped. Let's just do a quick mapping of it. So let's do natural breaks of 5 values is fine, and let's just go say apply, OK. So these are total populations, and this is a particularly exciting mapping here because we can see that we have a lot that are in very low classes, and then we have just a few that are really dense. So I would have to work on the classification scheme and also the color ramp to make this a better map. But we've basically got our data to a mappable state at this point in time, and that's where I want to kind of leave it before we get into the second video where we're fine-tuning our actual mapping. So the second part of this video is to do a second mapping, and this is utilizing data from the US Census that is not from the actual geodatabase bundle of Tiger. It's going to be outside of that platform. So here we want to actually go get census tracts at a state level. So this would be appropriate for a second mapping for tracts at a state level. And for the assignment, this would be considered an extra credit component. So this is a mandatory mapping here to do it at the county level, but for the extra credit, we can do it with census tracts. So let's go ahead and just save this project. So I'm just going to go ahead and say save. I've got it to this point. And I'm going to now go to a new project. And I'm just going to call this map2. So I'm going to do a save as, and it's going to be called M2. And say save. And now what I want to do is go ahead and go to my browser panel and get ready to actually bring in data from what's called American Fact Finder. And so let's go into American Fact Finder. So if we just search American Fact Finder, here it is. And we're going to use the advanced search. So under advanced search, show me everything. And here's where we're actually getting attribute data based on a guided search. So I want to first start off with topics. and I want to select a topic. So in this case, I probably want to do people. I'm just going to replicate what's already been done. So in this case, it's age and sex. And I'm just going to use, I'll just use the sex column, so males versus females. And I'll go ahead and close it. So now I have all the options that are available for this particular theme. And at the top here, I can see that I have 2016, which is basically the 2011 to 2015 5-year estimate data that we've been working with in tabular format outside of a geodatabase. And then down here, we can see that we have it for 2010, but this is really the one that I'm interested in right here. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And it gives me a little preview of what I'm getting. So here I can see I have total population and then age breakdowns of that total population. And then over here I can see that I have males and females. Now what I want to do is I want to not just download this without specifying a geography. So in this case I want to have this type of data for census tracts within a state, and I'll go ahead and use New York State as the example. So I'll say add remove geographies, and then in this case I want to go ahead and add in census tracts. So there's census tracts, so I'm mapping in a different geography than the county, and I go ahead and say select a state. In this case it'll be New York. That downloads. I say all census tracts within New York and add to your selections. And then we go ahead and say show table. And it shows us the table. So we have margin of error estimates, we have male, female, we have the tract name up at the top here, and then we have the breakdown in terms of our different categories over on the left-hand side here. So this is what I want, and now I just need to download it. So I click on download, and I'm going to be using as opposed to viewing the data, so I click on use. We're going to not merge the annotations and data, so I'll just click off that and include descriptive data element names. That's okay, and I'll just say okay. And this will take a moment for it to download, to prepare. Once it's prepared, then it'll be in a download format. Remember, this is just the attribute table, so it's going to be the attribute data for New York State census tracts for the theme, that the topic that we chose. And I can just look at it here and see that I have about 30,000 records. So that's a fair amount of data. I'm going to download it now. So there it is. And I'm just going to go ahead and stick this on my desktop real fast. And let's go get it. 1 second. Okay, and then I'm just going to stick it into my folder. Just do a right click and say extract. So that's my new data. So it looks very similar, but it's not the county level, it's at the actual census tract level. Now I'm going to go back to the Tiger geometries, and instead of doing the bundle, the American Community Survey Geodatabase bundle, I'm just going to go ahead and use the cartographic boundary shapefiles. Actually, I don't think I'm going to do that because these are for small scale. Do you see how it's listed as small scale? I kind of want this to be a little bit more large scale, so I'm going to go to Tiger line shapefiles and click on that. And so I want to be downloading, in this case my data is really for 2011 to 2015. But if we looked closely when we downloaded the data from American Fact Finder, it did say 2016. So I'm going to go ahead and use the 2016 Tiger shapefiles to make a vintage match. We want to make sure that we're using the same geography for the same year of attribute data, because census geographies, especially at the census tract level, they change over time, and we want to make sure that we're matching apples with apples, not saying oranges in the year 2010 with an apple that's actually the year 2015. We don't want that. So let's go ahead and download it, and I can just use the web interface. So I want to select the year. It's going to be 2016. The layer type, I want a census tract, and say submit. And that's going to ask me what state do you want. In this case, I want New York. Let's find it. You can always use the FTP if you want to, if this is not working. And then we just click on download, and it's going to download 7.2 megabytes of data. Okay, there it is. Bring this into my folder now. Do a right click, extract it, and stick it in my folder. Okay, throw these away. Okay, so let's make a new, add a directory. I'm going to add that folder, that top folder. And here what I can do is go ahead and just bring this in interactively. So in this case, I want to make sure that I'm bringing in my tracks to start off with. So this is going to be my census tracks. And I want to also be importing my CSV data. So in this case, I want to get my metadata. I want my annotations, and I want my CSV for the actual data itself. Okay, so everything's there now. Now what I need to do is just preview what I have. So if I open up the attribute table here, we can see that we have a GeoID. So this is probably going to be my join field, GeoID. If we go ahead and take a look at our attribute data, if we open the attribute table, okay, so we have GeoID2 here, and we can see that we have all our variables. Okay. And since this is outside of a geodatabase, I can immediately start working in it. I don't have to export it out again to a CSV because it's already in CSV format. So what I probably want to do is look at the metadata. So if I open up the metadata and I want to do a mapping now for census tracts based on, say, males under the 5 years, I'm definitely going to need this column. And I'm also going to need the total population for male. So I need to find that. That's going to be male total population is right here. And then I also have a column that's the total population of everyone. So those three columns probably make a lot of sense for this particular extra credit mapping. And what I would need to do now is go through the process of joining the data, making sure my string values actually are integer values. I'm also going to need to make sure that I normalize the data. So I'm going to handle normalizing data in the second video. So what we've done so far up to this point is get the second map for census tract mapping set up and ready to go. But you're still going to need to actually join this data. And remember, the join columns for this, if we go to open attribute table, it's a little bit different. This one's GeoID 2. If we open the attribute table, it's going to be GeoID 2. And one last thing before I finish here that I want to show is if we look at one of our columns here, so this looks like total population right here. Yeah, this is total population. If I take a look, if I just sort it, there'll be some zeros here at the top. And let's see how many records we have of zeros. It looks like there's 61 of these that are zeros. And a lot of times these zeros in census data are places like Central Park in New York City or, say, Governor's Island, where they didn't take a census in that particular geography and they didn't estimate it. So It's not so much that it's a null value, it just means that something wasn't collected there. So there's a couple ways to handle that. I mean, you can do a few techniques to segment out those areas that aren't really statistically important. The other option is you can just leave them in for your mapping. So for this upcoming mapping assignment, leaving them in is perfectly fine. It's more of an advanced topic to handle these particular. They're not really null values per se. They're just zeros, and they're oftentimes associated with either a low count or a no count in that particular geography. So hopefully this first video gets us set up in downloading the data, census data, working with both tabular data and also the geometry for tracts and for counties, and getting us ready to take the next step, which is actually doing table normalization and doing the final mapping thematically with different classification methods.